The Washington, D.C. City Council has approved a measure to abolish the celebration of Columbus Day. Was set to take place this coming Monday there. The holiday is going to be replaced by Indigenous Peoples Day, and this was so important to the D.C. City Council, they called an emergency session before the horror of Columbus Day arrived, and they called it all off. Jarrett Stepman is author of the book, The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. And you can imagine Jarrett has some comments on this. Jarrett, welcome to the program. How are you, my friend?
Thank you very much. I'm doing well.
So let's talk about Columbus, Jarrett, because Iowa, of course, has a very vibrant Italian community. I know there are a lot of Italian residents of Iowa that take pride in this day. How have we misrepresented Columbus as time has gone on?
You know, it really is incredible. At one time, Columbus very much represented, well, I mean, to a certain extent, America itself. There's a reason why they call it the District of Columbia, which, of course, is named after the famous explorer after him. I mean, from the time of the Founding Fathers, they saw Columbus as ushering in a new world, which eventually led to the creation of the United States. Columbus was a man who, you know, kind of had a foot in both worlds. He was a man who came originally from Europe, originally from Italy, and made that voyage that ultimately changed human history. I think changed human civilization. And so at one time, Columbus was, I think, a great hero to many, many Americans, I think most of the country. I think there have been times in our country's history where his legacy has come under attack. I certainly wrote about in my book how, especially in the early 20th century, when there was waves of migration from with Italians coming to the United States, he did come under attack, especially by some, I think, white supremacist groups. The Ku Klux Klan wasn't particularly happy with some of the statues being built. They said he was too Catholic, he was too Italian. But Americans really came to embrace Columbus. I mean, they came to embrace Columbus as one of their own, and I think that's very much a worthwhile and worthy. I mean, without Columbus, there would be no America, and to a certain extent, that's what's so sad about some of these attacks is I think there is a lot of misinformation about his legacy and what he really stood for, but we're really saying, you know, Columbus isn't good enough. Maybe our country isn't good enough.
Where did this all start? I know that you've got the book out, The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. Can you trace an origin to when folks started to really inject into, as you were saying, you've got these fringe groups that are going against Columbus and impugning his history. But when did it get so mainstream? Is there anybody responsible for that, Jarrett?
You know, it really, especially in the United States, it did kind of start with the histories of Howard Zinn, who's this kind of far-left historian who became kind of popular. He wrote some books in the 70s and 80s, The People's History of the United States, being very famous. And he had a very negative attack on Christopher Columbus. And he used a lot of accounts from Marxists like, well, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who didn't like Columbus because they thought he brought ushered in global capitalism and things like this. And unfortunately, a lot of these books have been used in American schools. They've been kind of become the norm. Whereas before they were outliers, I think what you're seeing now is a generation of Americans who have been raised with this. I mean, Berkeley basically canceled Columbus Day in 1992. And, you know, Berkeley, California, you could kind of almost write off as well. Okay, it's Berkeley. But this is really spread around the nation. It's spread to cities and towns around the country. And I think most dramatically coming to the nation's capital, I think what should be the most shocking, it shows that really this movement has hit a fevered pitch.
Yeah. And the subtitle of your book is The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. And Jarrett, I think you were starting to get at this in your first answer, but what's behind all of this? You know, it wasn't that long ago where President Trump said, oh, we're going to start pulling down statues of George Washington next, and everyone laughed at him like he was crazy. Then people started talking about it. So tying this all together, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a growing number of Americans who ultimately see their country as generally unexceptional, and maybe worse, they see this country as exceptionally bad at this point. And I think that has really become ingrained in kind of a large segment of American culture. I didn't think this always used to be the way. I think Americans across the political spectrum found ways to celebrate their kind of common history, even though we disagreed about a lot of the politics. I think that's very different. And I think it is interesting, especially for those who are pushing this idea that we put Indigenous Peoples Day on top of Columbus Day. When they were asked, and I did note this in my book, can't we celebrate both? Can't we celebrate, the legacy of Native Americans here and Columbus? And the answer is definitively no. I mean, the answer is we need to wipe out this other one because this other one stands for things we don't like, and we need to wipe this history out. And I think that's really the character of this whole movement, to kind of wipe out history and statues and things like this. It's not a matter of, well, that particular person offends me or that person, or maybe we should discuss. I think it really is about we need to bury all of American history because something is fundamentally wrong with American culture. The ideas, the things that we value are fundamentally broken. They stand in the way of progress, our brave new utopian future. And I think that's a very bad way of looking at things. I think it's a warped one that will lead to, unfortunately, a lot more misery and division in this country.
I really appreciate that answer because I've wondered the same. I don't understand why we can't have a separate day. Columbus Day, I'm all in favor of Indigenous Peoples Day. Let's go back to Columbus, though, Jarrett. Was he a pillager? Was he a genocidal maniac? What's the truth about Columbus?
The truth is, it's almost in many ways the exact opposite. I mean, it's not as if some of the people who came to the New World, certainly some of the Spanish conquistadors, were not very violent people and bad people too. I mean, so were many of the indigenous peoples that they encountered in the New World. But to put that on Columbus particularly, I think is really incredible. I mean, Columbus, in fact, he actually had to reprimand a lot of his crews that he thought had mistreated natives. In fact, he got in a lot of trouble with the Spanish crown that he sailed under. It's kind of funny now that Columbus is pinned and blamed for these things, even though he was the guy who was often trying to stop it. And, his legacy as a true explorer, and I think an incredibly brave man who took 3 ships that are about 40 feet long, cast into the Atlantic, into the unknown waters, a very dangerous voyage, that guy can no longer be celebrated in the achievement, the triumph that he had. If only, we had so much bravery in society now that Columbus exhibited when in 1492, he made that world famous voyage.
Jarrett, you've said this, you said it earlier, where you've said this is a conspiracy to make us stop thinking that America is great, that America is exceptional. And part of that also is when you start using that language, we're great and we're exceptional. There's been a long conspiracy to get us to stop saying those things too, saying that's xenophobic as well. So this seems to me it's all connected to try to stop us from thinking of the America as an exceptional nation. Would you agree with that?
I definitely agree with that. But you know what? I think to a certain extent we have so many advantages in this country, so many benefits, and look, it's been a while since we've been challenged by something as great and terrible as the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany and things like this. And I think, when you do see, especially when we're challenged by great evils in the world, I think the goodness that this country is and has been, I think really shines. I think a lot of those people who think, well, America's not so good, if they're going to make their choice of where they want to be and where they're going to be, it's always going to be here. And I think those actions speak louder than words. And I think it's unfortunate that so many, especially young Americans, have never been taught to really appreciate those things and think that, I'm going to pass down, this heritage of liberty. I've been given a great gift in this world that is often so terrible, so violent, is so full of tyranny. I should be appreciative of the things that I have and make my country a better place so the next generation will have things better than I did. That is the spirit of Americans. And to a certain extent, that's the spirit of Columbus.
Jarrett Stepman's book is The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. Jarrett, thanks for joining me. Thanks for setting the record straight.